Well, you can bet that just about everyone attending the First Minister's meeting in January will be struggling to have their issues addressed in time for the federal budget. Ed Stelmach has sent his wish list to Stephen Harper. It contains everything from a call to streamline regulatory regimes to addressing potential financial turmoil with the Canada Pension Plan. Our policy wonk, Ken Chapman, has been taking a closer look at Stelmach's letter. He joins us now to focus on a couple of areas that stood out for him. Pardon me. Ken is with Cambridge Strategies in Edmonton. Hi there, Ken. Welcome back to the program. What did you think of the letter, first off, that Premier Ed Stelmach sent to Prime Minister Stephen Harper?
Well, first off, I'm delighted that he actually made it public. I mean, this is a really good thing, so that it's on his website. Anybody can read it. It's quite a substantial letter. It's 5 pages long, single-spaced, and deals with 5 or 6 major issues. And I think the priorities of the issues are even amazing. But one of the fundamental things that I think he said here that is going to be very important is that in the opening paragraph, he talks about putting Canada first and having meaningful action on behalf of all of our citizens. While he's writing as the Premier of Alberta and talking about things that the federal and Alberta government can do together, he's obviously taking a nationalist point of view on what he's proposing here.
And that's a really different turn for a Premier in this province, certainly in the last number of years anyway.
Well, the polls show that 76% of Albertans see themselves as Canadians first, and that gets really lost in terms of the rhetoric that we often see coming out of central Canada and other parts of the country that we seem to be pegged as being nothing but greedy, selfish people, but we're not.
What is Stelmach's other list of priorities in the letter? What's he talking about?
One of the ones that really struck for me is that he's asking for a seat at the table on any North American discussions that will happen on climate change issues. So there's an obvious issue about Alberta being 10%, 12% of the population, 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the country. And so there's the Obama situation where his announcements this week where he put an environmental physicist in head of the energy issues in terms of the United States, sending a very clear signal about where he's coming from. We're going to be having to negotiate continental issues on climate change, and anything dealing with greenhouse gas emissions, Alberta wants to be at the table. Harper gave Quebec seats at international tables on issues that were important to them, and I think this is a kind of a quid pro quo issue. I think that Alberta definitely has to be at those tables, and I'm glad to see the Premier asking for them.
And part of the letter, he talks specifically about creating a protocol to actually clarify the roles for the provinces and also for the Prime Minister in the North American climate change talks.
All the conversations that are going on around Europe and around North America, except in Alberta, are about cap and trade. And cap and trade, in my humble opinion, is just a wealth transfer mechanism. It's not really going to solve the emission problems. So while Alberta's working and understand the environment is a shared jurisdiction constitutionally, so both federal government and provincial governments have roles in this, but we can't have two different standards. Industry's got enough on its back right now, and the environmental community needs to know what the standards they should be, looking at in terms of whether or not they're effective as well. So we've got to rationalize those standards. If we can rationalize sales tax in other parts of the country, surely we can rationalize greenhouse gas standards across the country.
And now he also makes infrastructure a priority in his letter. What does he say about that?
Well, Alberta's way ahead of the curve on infrastructure issues. We've been behind the curve, and listening to some of the callers in on Roger Gibbons' interview just prior, is that Alberta has tried to catch up from about 10 to 15 years worth of neglect on infrastructure issues. So we got a 20-year capital plan, and we're ready to go on it. But he really wants to stop the kinds of dual parallel approval processes on issues that the feds approve something and we approve something. Let's do one.
Yeah, so any examples of that kind of thing?
Well, environmental issues are environmental review issues, for example. Any kind of an industrial complex that's going up a plant, an upgrader plant or what have you, we can have parallel environmental review processes. Stelmach is suggesting we have one, that the feds accept the Alberta review process and as opposed to having joint processes or parallel processes. I don't think that'll be popular with a number of environmentalists because many people think the Alberta processes are insufficient, but they could be beefed up and have one process to make it quicker. And there's other issues about the infrastructure, too, is that there's federal money been sitting there, and the cities have been trying to get it for years, well, not years, but for over a year, and it's just been sitting there. There's been squabbling between different jurisdictions as to how the money is going to be doled out, and so it's time to get those kind of petty squabblings over with and get the money flowing.
Mm-hmm. This was a pretty substantial letter, as you point out, but I know that one of your colleagues at Cambridge Strategies, your policy institute there in Edmonton, was talking yesterday in the paper about some ideas that you people have that you think that the Premier should be addressing. What do you think from your perspective that Ed Stelmach should also be addressing at the conference when he gets together with the other premiers and the Prime Minister?
Well, I think he has to take a page out of Preston Manning's book, and I think we've got to make it very clear and start showing overtly that the environment and the economy are not mutually exclusive. They're not even opposite sides of the same coin. They're not part of a continuum. They are part of the same issue, is that if we're going to look at this, we have to take a much longer-term point of view on things, and I think this is an opportunity to do something transformational. Alberta is by far the best position to deal with all these things. Talking about a deficit is absolutely true based on our current spending plans and what we want to do. But the issue is not so much the deficit, is how are we going to come out of this? Are we going to come out of this situation in much better shape, or are we just going to come out wounded and hurting from an old model? Alberta really has a chance to transform itself. For example, we are now seeing that we are taking bitumen instead of cash for royalties. If we take actual bitumen, why wouldn't we take the next step and actually build an upgrader? Now, the capitalists and the free traders are going to say, my God, that's socialist. But we've done that so many times. We've had our telephone companies do that, rural electrification. The start of the oil sands is all about that. We could build another serious upgrader to the highest environmental standards and start setting the model and actually making those jobs come through here. We have the resources to do it. We have an inclination to do it, and it's something that we should seriously look at, is actually using some of our resources to build an upgrader and process bitumen ourselves here to learn how that is done. We can privatize it later if we want to, like we did with Suncor and Syncrude.
Interesting thoughts that you always have to share. Ken, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good talking to you.
That's Ken Chapman. He's a policy analyst with Cambridge Strategies in Edmonton. You can find his blog at ken-chapman.blogspot.com. In the meantime, tell us what you think. What do you think of Stelmach's priorities as he heads toward the January 1st ministers' meeting? Do you think he has Alberta's focus right? Should he be lobbying for something completely different? And what do you think about Ken's ideas about the idea of Alberta getting involved in buying upgraders and putting public money into that and perhaps, down the road privatizing them? But it's an interesting concept at this time in the province's history and in this economic turmoil that the world is finding itself in. Give our talkback line a call at 1-800-461-9219. That's 1-800-461-9219.